How's it going, y'all? Kind of wanted to talk about something that's kind of been on my mind. So I've been doing a lot of playtesting for the new format, and it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of really cool cards in the new set, and a lot of very fun, diverse things. Um, but I was watching Steve D's video today where he talks about FF10 mono wind, and he goes into like a pretty detailed discussion on Zidane specifically and the problems with that card. And I kind of wanted to just sit down and talk about it. And by no means do I think Zidane is the most toxic card in Mono Wind. To me, I think that you probably like if you ban Chocobo and Althea, I think Mono Wind stops being a thing. I think even banning Luso might actually be enough, to be honest. I think that Luso being both an engine piece and a payoff is arguably too strong. I think if you took that away, they don't have an engine that also is the win con. But that's not really what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about Zidane, specifically the Opus 16 hero. So if you're new to Final Fantasy TCG, which quite a few of you on the channel are, Zidane is one of the most common cards you'll see in any win list. Go ahead and read them together. So 2CP, 5K, so standard there. The jobs don't matter. What does matter is that when Zidane enters the field or attacks, your opponent removes the top card of the deck from the game, and you can cast it any time you can normally cast it. The cost for casting it is color fixed for you for free, and if you cast 3 cards this turn, so to fit into like a cast theme they want Wind to have, Zidane gets haste. So what you'll see with this card is your opponent will go do their 3rd cast, they'll put the Zidane down, they'll attack with Zidane, and they'll steal 2 cards from you that they can use for the rest of the game. And these cards they steal can be anything. They can be a terrible samurai backup. They could be Amaterasu and give Wind access to an effect they're not supposed to have. They could be your one copy of Sophie and they just never cast in a stage removed from the game. And admittedly, I don't think that the use case is like, oh, well, you lost access to Sophie for the rest of the game, is actually what's toxic about this card. I think if this card just removed the top card of the deck from the game or milled it instead, we wouldn't be having this discussion on Zidane. I think the card would be just outright terrible. It would feel bad when he shows up. Don't think I can argue that one. I don't think anybody likes having cards milled. But by the probabilities, the chances of the top card of your deck being the most important card of your deck is no different than it being 20 cards from the bottom. It's kind of the classic Pot of Desires syndrome, where like it feels really bad when Pot of Desires banishes the top 10 cards of your deck, but it's not more likely to do that than anything else. Therefore, you just don't plan around it. If you didn't play the Pot of Desires, you wouldn't have a chance to draw into the card that wins you the game anyway. And Zidane, like stealing cards you need for your actual engine, I don't consider to be an actual problem use of the card. There is a big problem with Zidane, though, and I'll get more into that later. So why is this card run at 2 or 3 in just about every win list? Well, the biggest reason is that it's hard for this card to be bad. It's the haste is important. It can actually help them push damage when they need to. The steal effectively is card draw, and although the cards you steal might be completely useless, sometimes you just cast a useless card in Wind because you have the CP, and it might deflect some damage later on in the game, right? And then sometimes it just outright wins you the game. And again, in those situations, if you played, you know, a Luso or a Cerberus and drew a card, maybe you just draw into the card that wins you the game anyway, right? Like, the opportunity cost isn't there. Here's where Zidane is problematic, and that's the enter the field or attacks and the ability to do both in the same turn. So, if you don't know, if you haven't played Final Fantasy TCG for a long time, they tend to base their game on Magic. The designer, I believe, is a very avid Magic player, or like the lead designer tends to really base a lot of cards around there. Renoa is, I want to say the Magic card is Guardian Angel. I call him not Solemn Strike, but it's probably more akin to a counterspell, is what probably they would treat it as. Um, Warp is very clearly inspired by Magic's Suspend mechanic. Haste, Brave, all of that have direct analogs in Magic. Back attack is Flash. All of these cards have direct parallels with what they do in Magic, right? And Zidane's no exception. I'm going to pull up two cards that... Literally, I'm not a Magic player, but I know what Zidane is based on and why Zidane exists. And the card that it's based on is Ragavan Nimble Pilfer. I've got a Pokemon card on here that I'll get to in a second and why I think it makes Zidane a problem card. But Ragavan Nimble Pilfer is maybe the best card in Modern, to my knowledge. Essentially, it's a one mana creature that your opponent has to deal with or they will lose the game. And Ragavan lets you steal the top card of your deck. Zidane is a better version of Ragavan. Zidane's ability to get haste it's free. Zidane doesn't generate mana for you like Ragavan does, but Zidane doesn't have the restriction that you have to cast the card you steal that turn. Zidane can do it twice in a turn. Ragavan only does it once. Zidane gets it on attack. Ragavan has to actually deal damage. And Ragavan, I think, is, if I remember correctly from what I understand, and Magic players can correct me below, but Ragavan is or was the most warping card in the game when he was around, or like, you know, during his prime. But I think there's another problem with Zidane that I don't think people realize quite to the same degree. And that is Zidane's best matchup is against another wind player. When you play Zidane against a wind player and you go third cast Zidane, attack with Zidane, steal a card, Zidane says draw 2 cards. Because your opponent's deck is going to be close enough to yours that you're effectively drawing from your own deck. So what ends up happening is that as Wind becomes the better deck, or one of the most, like, Wind is generally considered perpetually a tier 1 deck in some form, right? As Wind gets better, more people play Wind. As Wind is played, Zidane gets better. And there are other really good Zidanes, and they don't see play because this one is seeing play because it's so good in Wind mirror matches. And I think this is the reason that I would ban Zidane. I don't think Ragavan by itself, if Zidane was just Ragavan, it would be a problem. The reason Zidane is a problem card in Final Fantasy, in my opinion, is because Zidane's best matchup is himself. The best thing Zidane can do is find another Wind deck. And Pokemon learned this lesson a long time ago with Mewtwo EX. I'm not going to go... I'll go a little bit into why Mewtwo EX was a problem card. So Mewtwo EX was, for the 2 years it was in Pokemon Standard, probably the most dominant and most important card in the metagame. So 170 HP, it's an EX, so it was 2 prize cards. And the big key attack is this X-Ball. Does 20 damage times the number of energy attached to this Pokemon or the defending Pokemon. This could be powered up with a single card. You could put a double colorless energy. X-Ball would do 40 damage for the Mewtwo plus however much for the other Pokemon, right? The problem with Mewtwo came with this. I don't have my cursor on screen, but the weakness is Psychic. What this means is the best counter to Mewtwo is a Mewtwo. If your opponent goes on their first turn and they start with a Mewtwo EX, and they put a double colorless energy on it, and then you go to your turn, and you play your own Mewtwo EX with a double colorless energy, your Mewtwo EX hits for 80 damage, which is then doubled by weakness to do 160. Any additional damage source, I believe there was some way of getting like that extra 10 damage, would be a knockout. So not only was Mewtwo the fastest, most powerful card in the game, Mewtwo's worst matchup was himself. That is the problem with Mewtwo. Every single deck had to play Mewtwo because every other deck was playing Mewtwo, and the best way to kill a Mewtwo was a Mewtwo. When you end up in a situation like that, you end up in a thing where it starts to warp deck building. It's the same reason why I think Maxi should be banned in every format in Yu-Gi-Oh! Maxi essentially, the more Maxi is in the game, the more everybody has to run the counters to Maxi, and you end up creating just a really unfun minigame. That's what Zidane does. Short history lesson: why did Zidane get here? How is Zidane arguably the most obnoxious card in the best deck in the game? And the reason is because they can't not print good Zidanes. All of these cards are some of the most powerful cards in the game. This 3CP Zidane, if this card wasn't in the game, you would see a copy of this in every win list. Maybe even two. Water Zidane, when it was in around Opus 8 to about Opus 10, had no good answer. It was extremely powerful. And then now, I mean, when this is what you're competing with in a win deck, you have to print a card as ridiculously obnoxious and pushed as the new Zidane just to have a chance of the card seeing play. And, like, it's hard because, like, I get it. They need their win card to do well. They gave it the Zidane, which means they have to find a way to make it a card you want to play, which means they have to push it almost this much because this Zidane is so good at all times. If you're playing against another win deck, that like even a fire win deck probably would play that Zidane, outside of whatever wants to be an aggressive hand loop deck like that this Zidane can enable. It's a very frustrating situation, but they have to push Zidane so much because every Zidane is so strong. And I'll admit I don't know the answer on this one. I would like to see this Zidane banned. Honestly, even the confiscation Zidane should be banned as well, but I kind of get why he isn't. But yeah, I don't know. It's not the first card I would remove from Wynn's card pool, admittedly. I would definitely go after Chocobo and Althea first, but yeah, I'll probably have a deck list for y'all at some point in the near future. We can talk about just kind of win cards a little bit more in general. I'm sure some of you saw my deck list from the 2 deck locals pretty recently. So yeah, thanks for watching, everybody.